Janome.
Hi, I'm Janome Educator Katy Mitchell. Today we're going to be making a bathrobe using Janome's AirThread 2000D professional serger. Now this serger has it all. Really great quality when I'm stitching, but what's really amazing about it is the one-push AirThread system for the lower loopers. It is phenomenal. Gone are the days of struggling, trying to get those loopers threaded correctly. It's a thing of beauty and you're really going to enjoy it. Today I'm going to be using Simplicity pattern 1946. Now be sure and read through all the instructions of the pattern to familiarize yourself with it before you cut it out or begin sewing it. I will also be using the Janome Memory Craft 6700P for a few steps. This machine gives you tons of workspace with its 10-inch all-metal seamless flatbed. It's also packed with 200 built-in stitches, 5 alphabets, and we're going to be using Janome's AccuFeed Flex fabric feeding system. This machine is ready for anything. Now, I've already cut out everything I need to make this bathrobe. I went ahead and took Pellon SF101 as my interfacing and fused it where it needs to be. I've also marked on my front of my bathrobe the placement for my pockets and the belt loop on the side. So let's take a look at our AirThread 2000D and see how I've got that set up. Now I'm going to be using both the needles on my serger for a 4-stitch seam. I've got all my spools of thread up here and it totally threaded and ready to go. But I want to talk to you about the tension a little bit. I've got it set at 3 all the way across, which is your standard settings. I've done a stitch off and it looks wonderful. My stitch length over here on the side is also set to a 3.0, and if you compare it to a regular sewing machine, which we normally sew at like a 2.2 or 2.4, that's what it relates to. My differential feed, which is how my feed dogs are pulling my fabric, is set at a 1.0. Everything is middle of the road and works great. But if I have to adjust anything, I know I can go to my manual and see which way to turn these knobs and dials. Before I start sewing, there's also one other thing I want to check on. What is my seam allowance for this pattern? Sometimes things are 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, but in this case, I've checked my pattern and it says to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. To do that on my foot, which is really nice, they have these notches. Each one lines up with my needle. So my needle to the left and needle to the right. I also have grooves over here that shows me the stitch width. If I take my seam allowance and mark it at 5/8 inch, I can see that if I put my fabric, the edge of it up here, and use this notch, that is going to be my 5/8 inch seam for sewing. So that's how I'm going to line up my fabric when I sew. You're also going to wonder, do I use clips? Do I use pins? What do I do to keep my fabric together? Well, clips are nice for certain things, but when I'm sewing garments, I am a pin girl all the way. I like to pin like this, so when I am sewing, I can pull that pin out before it gets to the blade. Because if I hit the blade with a straight pin, a couple things can happen. I can nick my blade, I can cut my straight pin in half, or I might even break my blade, and we don't want that to happen. So now, let's get on to sewing. Now I've gone ahead and I've marked the front of my bathrobe for the marks that I need to place my pockets on, and also for my belt loop, which we're going to be getting ready right now. I've taken my pockets and I have serged the edge of it, but now to get it ready to lay flat, I've taken a basting stitch around the edge at about a 1/2 inch away, and I've also sewed down 5/8 of an inch from each side. This is 1.5 inches for the hem. I'm going to go ahead and pull my basting stitch, and it really helps with getting that curve nice. Okay. I'm also going to turn this over and make sure I get those little corners peeked out real good. And now I can take it to the iron and press it down and have it nice and flat and attach it to the bathrobe. At the same time, I'm going to go ahead and get my belt loop ready. To do that, I iron the edges into the center, and then I'm going to fold it again. Then I'm going to take it to our 6700P and we'll get these things stitched on. I've got my pockets pinned down to the front. Don't they look pretty good? I've got this ironed and ready to be stitched, and now we're going to the 6700P. I've got my dual feed foot on, which is a wonderful thing because now I have feed dogs that are up and below and things feed through smoothly. I've just got it set for regular sewing and off I go. I'm going to lower my foot and I'm going to sew the edge together. I'm also going to turn it and sew the other side as well. And use my scissors to cut. Lift my foot and it's done. I'm going to fold it in half and cut it, and now I have my 2 belt loops. I'm going to set those aside, and now I'm going to do my pockets. When I do a pocket, I want it to look nice. I want it to be reinforced up here, so what I'm going to do is use my reverse button on my straight stitch after I start sewing to back it up and reinforce that. I'm using the inside edge of my foot as my guide to where my pocket edge is going to be, so it's nice and even. Now when I get down to the corner part, I go a lot slower. I also can lift, but this machine does come with a knee lift that you could use as well to do it, to make sure you have a nice curved seam, well balanced. I'm going to pull this out so I don't sew over it. And again, when I come up to the end, I'm going to use the reverse button and make sure I've reinforced that seam. Scissors, and 1 pocket's on there, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and get the other one stitched on, and then we'll go to the serger. I've gone ahead and pinned my shoulder seams together, right sides facing each other, and now we're going to go to the serger. Lining up the edge of my fabric with that 5/8 inch mark. I lift my foot just a bit to get that underneath, and off I go. Be sure and pull those pins out because you don't want to cut them. I'm going ahead and chain piece a little bit in between. I don't have to cut. And go to the second one. Okay. Once I have my seams serged, look how nice that looks, I'm going to go ahead and place my arm, shoulders, and sleeves into place. When I look at my pattern, I know that the little notch that's right here is the front, and I want to find that same notch on my sleeve to line it up. I'm going to go ahead and pin these into place. The little notch here in the center of my sleeve, that is for my seam alignment. And off to the other side I go. Again, lining up those notches. And it's going to curve down. I am going to have a little pucker in there, but it will come out when I serge, you'll see. The nice thing about every time I stop, I can readjust and get everything nice and smooth. A lot of times when you're sewing in a shoulder seam, you have to gather it, but with this one, it's wide enough to where I can do it in one continuous movement. And ta-da, your first sleeve is in. Now I'm going to go on to the second one. And now both sleeves are in. So I'm ready to get my side seam sewn. I went ahead and placed my belt loop on by folding it in half and pinning it to where I've placed a mark for it. And I've pinned things together on both sides. Now when I get up to my seam, I'm not worried about these right here because they're going to be cut off anyway. And just like that, my first seam is done, and now I'm going to go on to the second one. And both seams are done. I'm going to turn it right side out, and you'll be able to see that it is beginning to look a lot like a bathrobe. So now we're going to put on the facing. Again, we're going to pin everything into place because we don't want it to move around when we're sewing it. First things first, I've got my shoulder seams of my facing pinned and ready to sew. Now once I've done that, there's another step I do with the serger. A lot of times in your pattern pieces it's going to tell you to fold it under and press it 1/4 inch and then stitch it. But when you have a serger, this is so easy. All you do is serge the edge of it all the way around for a nice professional look. And we're going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm just cutting off a little bit of it like it's 1/4 inch. Again, my threads are going to be snipped off. Okay, and you can see how that looks. It's a great finish. Now we're going to pin it in place. I'm going to match up my shoulder seams, bringing out those little threads. I know some of you might not be pinners, but I am. It just makes for such a nice finished project when things line up. Now on the real long seams, like down below, I'm not going to pin that, but I just want to make sure the curved pieces and that are lying in the right place. On each side I will pin that. Okay, and now I'm ready to serge it. Make sure I have my tails pulled out so they'll get cut off. Okay, so you can see I have the facing on, but another step I need to do now, I'm going to iron it really good, and I'm going to have it folded to the inside like this, and I'll pin it into place. So I've gone ahead and gone to the iron, pressed everything nicely in place, and pinned it into place. A few more things I want to do. I want to actually serge the edge of the bottom for the hem and the edges for the sleeves. This makes a really nice finished product. Then I'm going to go ahead and make our belt. Let's get going. And this I'm just going to sew right on the edge, just trim off just a wee bit. And now I'm going to do the sleeves. Now when I get close to my beginning, I still have this and it's going to be cut off, so I'm not worried about it either. I serged over what I had already previous done and now I'm cutting it. Now a lot of people, what they do with this, there's different ways you can finish it off. Mine is, I'll just take one of the long threads and pull it, and it kind of makes it into a little knot for me. And then I'm just going to trim it off. Some people actually use a thing called fray check, which is like a little glue. Other people actually put a needle to it and thread it back through the seam. But this I found is quick and easy and lasts. Okay, let's do the other sleeve. Again, I'm just going to pull it till it knots a little bit and trim. That makes a really nice edge for when we fold it up to do the hem. I'm going to set that aside for now, and we're going to talk about the belt. Real easy to do. Right sides together. I need to sew that center seam. Then I'm just going to open it up and I'm going to fold it in half and pin it. Makes it much easier to sew that way. Okay. Now when you're doing a belt, because you're going to have to turn it inside out, you need to keep an opening for it. And it depends on where you find the best place for you. Some people actually use an edge like this, but I prefer to take it more towards the back, and I'll leave an opening like this so I can turn it inside out. Now I can come around with my serger, I don't have to trim it off, and just pick it up like this, and my blade is going to cut that thread for me. Now I'm close to the area where I want to leave that opening, so I'm just going to sew off, sew a little bit, and put it back on. And continue sewing. Now you're probably wondering why I didn't use 5/8 of an inch on this for my seam allowance. I like a little fatter belt. Sometimes if you do a 5/8 inch, they get a little thin. So that's just my personality of how I like it. So now I'm going to go ahead and clip this real quick, and we're going to turn it inside out and get it ready to sew. So I'm back from the ironing board. We've got everything on the belt turned inside out and ironed nicely. But I do want to take a top stitch around the whole belt to reinforce it. Also, it's going to close that opening I had where I pulled it inside out. So I'm done with my serger and I'm coming back to my 6700P. Again, I'm keeping my dual feed foot on because it's just a marvelous foot for sewing, and I'm going to stitch around. I'm going to use the inside of my foot as a guide for me to the edge of my belt loop so everything will be uniform. I also, if I wanted to, I have 91 positions I can move that needle to on here so I can get a scant whatever I need. So I'm going to go ahead and lift my foot up and get going. When I get towards the end, I am going to keep my needle down so I can lift and turn. And the same thing on the other corner. And when I come up to meet my seam, I'm going to go ahead and hit my locking button on this machine, so it's going to create a knot so it won't unravel. Slows down, takes those 5 stitches around the same area, and I'm ready to use my scissors. And my belt is complete. I'm just going to go ahead and trim off my little tails there, and you can see how nice it is. So now we're done with the belt, and I'm going to set that aside. Going back to the bathrobe. I've gone ahead and measured up 2.5 inches for my hem and stitched, or not stitched, sorry about that, pinned everything in place on both sleeves. On the bottom though, for the hem, I do something a little different because I really like it a nice finished clean look. So I have folded my facing on top of it. I marked my 2.5 inch, and I'm just going to stitch across that. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, the reason I did that is now when I measure my 2.5 inches and turn it, it is really nice and crisp and clean. So I'm going to go ahead and get this measured and turned up, and then we're going to finish hemming it. Okay, I'm just going to run to the iron real quick and press that down, and we'll be ready to sew it. Okay, so I am back from the iron and ready to stitch everything into place. Look how nice that came out. That's the corner for my hem. So I'm going to start with my sleeves though and just take a stitch all the way around. Now depending on your machine, makes sometimes things a little easier than it can be. This is a flatbed machine, which I don't have any problem with, so I just deal with it. But some people have where they can open up their machine for a free arm, which makes making sleeves and small areas like that real easy. But on this, I just move it aside and off I go. Taking out my pins so I don't sew over them and break a needle. And when I get up here again, I'm going to take my locking stitch so it won't come unraveled, and use my scissors. And now I'm going to do the next sleeve. Locking stitch, and scissors. Both sleeves are hemmed. Now I'm going to go on to the facing. Now the facing is kind of like a two-part thing, because what I want to do is I actually just want to sew straight up all the way around and stop. But then I'm going to take another stitch to hold the facing down all the way around. So let's get this first one out of the way. Tell you, using this foot, it's just like butter. Again, using my locking stitch. And cut. And that part is done. Now the last step to this bathrobe is sewing down the facing and actually doing the hem. I'm going to do it from the inside out. I think it works best for me that way. Tuck in any little strays and bring it right up to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a locking stitch here and cut my hem. So now I'm just ready to sew that other section down of my facing. And I'm going to start it at the edge. Now I did use the reverse button at the beginning to just lock it in there a little bit. My seams line up nicely on the shoulders. Again, taking it down to the end, going to use my locking stitch and scissors. And your bathrobe is finished. What do you think? Looks pretty good on the inside, I think. All I have to do is trim off my loose threads, put the belt in, and it's ready to go. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed making this bathrobe with me. If you want to learn more information about the Janome AirThread 2000D serger or the 6700P sewing machine, go into your local authorized Janome dealer and take a test drive. Also, check out the current promotions we have going on. Happy sewing!